Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. Forensic work is continuing on the Hawaiian island of Maui to find victims of wildfires that have killed at least 80 people. The US government is sending more resources to help the search efforts. Some fires still haven't been contained. There are widespread power cuts. Our correspondent Helena Humphrey is at an emergency shelter.
I think many people are going to be coming back to rubble, essentially, and that is why we're seeing more of these cadaver sniffer dogs coming in from the US mainland to get a clearer picture of how many people were trapped in buildings, because the death toll as it stands, that already grim death toll of 80 people, the worst in this state's history, is accounting for people that have been found out in the open. We don't know the status of those buildings which we've seen completely razed to the ground, essentially blackened, charred husks of buildings. Anything that's left standing is coated in a thick layer of ash.
The authorities in Ecuador have carried out a huge operation to move a gang leader accused of threatening the murdered presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio to a maximum security jail. About 4,000 soldiers and police took part in the transfer of Jose Adolfo Mejias, known as Fito, and two other inmates. Mr. Villavicencio, who spoke out against organised crime and corruption, was shot dead at the end of a rally on Wednesday. His party has put forward his running mate, Andrea Gonzalez, to stand in this month's presidential elections. At a news conference, Mr. Villavicencio's widow, Veronica Sarauz, denounced the arrangement.
They have taken the arbitrary measure of naming the vice presidential candidate to replace Fernando, but we all know that this is illegal. The candidacies in this country cannot be renounced. The running mate cannot succeed him because the elections have not yet been won.
The Taliban say Afghan universities are ready to readmit women, but a final decision is up to the group's supreme leader. The hardline Islamists banned female students from campuses last year. Rory Gallimore reports.
Women in Afghanistan haven't been allowed to return to class since December. The ban prompted international condemnation, angry protests, and despair from the students themselves. But it's becoming clear that the Taliban are far from united on whether the measure should be temporary. In an interview with the Associated Press, a Taliban education advisor said many senior officials were in favour of reversing the decision. But he said it was entirely up to their leader, Hibatullah Akhundzada, when or if that should happen.
Thousands of homes in Russia's Far East have been flooded after Typhoon Khanun made landfall. Heavy rains breached a dam. A state of emergency has been declared in 15 areas across the Primorye region, which has seen its worst flooding in a decade. World news from the BBC. The French Coast Guard has called off the search for two people feared missing after a boat carrying migrants sank in the Channel. 6 Afghan men have died. They were trying to reach Britain. Simon Jones reports from the English South Coast.
Both the British and the French authorities will be keen to speak to the survivors of this latest loss of life in the Channel after their harrowing ordeal. Some tried to bail water out of their flimsy, overcrowded boat as it started to sink. Others were in the sea pleading for help. Investigators are looking for any information that might lead them to the smuggling gang which organised the crossing. The French minister responsible for safety at sea, Hervé Berville, on a visit to Calais, denounced the criminal traffickers who he said were sending migrants to their death. The British government said it was vital to break the business model of the people smugglers and stop the boats.
Peru has announced it will once again intercept drug trafficking planes that fly over its airspace. Under a new deal with the United States, the Peruvian Air Force will receive training and equipment. Peru's Prime Minister said his country would act without hesitation to stop the planes of gangs and cartels. But the Defence Minister stressed the importance of doing so using non-lethal methods. The American football player Damar Hamlin has returned to action for the first time since suffering a cardiac arrest during a match. He collapsed after making a tackle in January and had to be resuscitated on the pitch. 7 months later, he's taken part in a pre-season game for the Buffalo Bills, where he made 3 tackles, which were met with loud cheers from the crowd. The British heavyweight boxer Anthony Joshua has won a crucial fight in London. He knocked out his Finnish opponent, Robert Helenius, in the 7th round. The former world champion has suffered 3 defeats in recent years, but is now on course for a multi-million-dollar bout with the American Deontay Wilder. Helenius took Saturday's fight against Joshua with only a week's notice after the British boxer Dylan White failed a drug test.